Hello and welcome back to Tales from the World's Firesides. I'm Clive Gilson, the story guy, and today I'm telling a traditional Scandinavian folk tale called Little Annie The Goose-Girl. The source for this tale is a translation by George Webbe Dasent in his book Popular Tales from the Norse, published in 1912. And this tale is taken from an original by Asbjørnsen and Moe in their Nortek, Folkeeventyr. This tale appears in my book, Tales from the Old Norse, which contains over 35 traditional Norse and Scandinavian folk tales. And as ever, my main aim is to tell stories that otherwise might be forgotten or lost to modern readers, particularly outside of the originating culture. Tales that help us to share our cultures and maybe make the world just that little bit less complex. Right, let's get on with the story. Little Annie the Goose-Girl. Once upon a time, there was a king who owned so many geese that he needed a girl to take care of them. This girl was named Annie, so she was called Annie the Goose-Girl. Now one day, a prince from England went out searching for a bride, and as he travelled, he found Annie sitting in his path. "Sitting all alone, are you, little Annie?" asked the prince. "Yes," replied Annie, "here I sit, sewing stitch by stitch and patch by patch. Today I'm waiting for the prince from England." "Well, you shouldn't expect to marry him," said the prince. "Oh, but if I'm meant to marry him," said Annie, "then marry him I shall." Later, artists were then sent out to capture portraits of the most beautiful princesses for the prince to choose from. Now he became quite taken with one princess and set out to marry her, feeling happy and hopeful. However, the prince possessed a magical stone that he kept by his bedside, which knew everything. Annie warned the princess that if she had any secrets or had ever had another lover, she should avoid stepping on the stone, as it would reveal everything to the prince. The princess, worried by this, asked Annie to take her place in bed that night and switch places when the prince fell asleep. They followed through with this plan, and when Annie stepped on the stone, the prince asked, "Who is this that steps into my bed?" And the stone replied, "A pure and bright maiden." So they slept. But during the night, the princess switched places with Annie, and the next morning the prince again asked, "Who is this that steps out of my bed?" "One who has had 3 children," said the stone, and outraged, the prince sent the princess away and looked for another bride. Now the prince continued his search, but Annie appeared in his path once more. "Sitting all alone again, little Annie, the goose-girl?" asked the prince. "Yes, I sit here stitching and patching, waiting for the prince from England," said Annie. "You shouldn't expect to marry him," said the prince. "But if I'm meant to marry him," Annie replied, "then marry him I shall." This same situation repeated itself, with the next princess being revealed by the stone to have had 6 children. The prince sent her away as well, but determined, he searched for yet another princess, and again Annie positioned herself in his path. "Sitting all alone, little Annie the Goose-Girl?" asked the prince. "Yes, here I sit, stitching and patching, waiting for the prince from England," said Annie. Again he said, "You should not expect to marry him." "But if I'm meant to marry him," Annie replied, "then marry him I shall." When the next princess arrived, Annie warned her as she had the others. The princess, also worried, asked Annie to take her place that night, and Annie agreed. When she stepped on the stone, the prince asked, "Who is this that steps into my bed?" And the stone replied, "A pure and bright maiden." Later in the night, the prince placed a ring on Annie's finger that fit so tightly that she couldn't remove it, and then the princess switched places with Annie. The next morning, the prince asked, as usual, "Who is this that steps out of my bed?" "One who has had 9 children," said the stone. Now furious, the prince sent the princess away and demanded the stone explain everything. The stone revealed how the princesses had tricked him, using Annie as a stand-in. To confirm the truth, the prince went to find Annie, who was tending her geese. He noticed a rag tied around one of her fingers and asked why it was there. "Well, I've cut myself badly," said Annie. But the prince insisted on seeing the finger, and when he removed the rag, he saw his ring. Recognising her, he took her to the palace, dressed her in fine clothes, and they were married. And thus Little Annie the Goose-Girl married the Prince of England, just as fate had decreed. And that's the story of Annie the Goose-Girl. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate you spending a little time with these stories. The book Tales from the Old Norse is available in hardback, paperback and ebook formats from all good retail and online bookstores. And if you've enjoyed the story, you can find out more about me, Clive Gilson, the story guy, and Tales from the World's Firesides as a project at clivegilson.com. There are also dedicated Facebook and YouTube channels in the banner at the bottom of the screen. Now, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button. It does always help to keep these stories front and centre, and please do follow or subscribe to these channels if you want to hear new stories pretty much every week, or get into the backlog of stories that are already up there. That's it for now though, so until next time, keep reading, keep watching and listening, and stay inspired.